Always forget to hit record. Thank you, Lee. So good morning and welcome to the React Learning Series session. My name is Vanessa Brewer. I am the Regional Interagency Council Program Administrator, and my co-host is Lee Taylor. Lee is the State Interagency Council Program Administrator, and we work at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. We want to thank you for joining us today. Today's React Learning Series session is titled the Youth Mental Health Crisis. It's a two-part session. So during the first part of the session, we're going to hear from Marcy Timmerman, Executive Director of Mental Health America of Kentucky, on the current crisis from the national level. And during the second part of the session, we'll hear from Lisa Crabtree. She's the Senior Researcher and also KIP Survey Project Director, and also Meredith Cahill. She's the epidemiologist. They are both with Reach Evaluation, and we're going to hear from them about the current state of mental health among Kentucky adolescents. Before I turn it over to our presenters, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, let me apologize. I know that you're hearing the doorbell. I know that there was a Zoom update, and I have not gone in and disabled that, so my apologies for that. That should slow down here in just a second. Also, if you haven't already, please mute your mics. We have carved out time at the end of this session for questions and answers, and at that time, you are free to come off of mute and or use the chat box for any questions that you might have and or comments. Lee and I will be watching the chat box. Also, this workshop will be recorded and posted on the React YouTube channel. We will put that link in the chat box a little bit later. There will also be a session evaluation link that we'll post closer to the end of the session, so please take a moment to complete it. At that time, it's only about 4 questions, so it's really quick. And as always, certificates of attendance are available by request. You can email me if you would like to have one, and I will put my email in the chat box. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter, Marcy Timmerman.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Let me get this in slideshow mode. So yeah, talking about the youth mental health crisis, and I am giving you just a really eagle-eye view, big picture, right, in the United States. So first of all, who am I? I am not a provider. That's the big thing. I want to make sure folks are clear about that. I am an advocate, have been for about 17 years now, actually, but and I am the executive director at MHA Kentucky. So have been here for about 7 years. MHA Kentucky is a C3. We are here in Kentucky. We've been here since 1951. You'll want to look up the mental health bell story when you get these slides. It's really cool. But to skip through all of that just to get to the real meat of the thing, right? Did you know we have 1,131,474 children in Kentucky? And this is bigger because that was from 2021, right? So we know the birth rate is pretty decent here. So I just want to kind of center that, right? This is where we're talking about easily a quarter of the Kentucky population. So our youth are important, and over 1 in 10 youth are in the US are experiencing depression that is severely impairing their ability to function at school or work, at home with family, or in their social life. That's a really important statistic. And that is nationally, right? That's not the Kentucky. You'll get that soon. But here are a couple of more statistics that I thought would kind of ground us in what we're doing. 16.39% of youth ages 12 to 17 report suffering from at least one major depressive episode in the past year. 11.5% of youth over 2.7 are experiencing severe major depression. These stats are from 2022, I should be clear. They were reported in the 2023 MHA National State of Mental Health Report. I will make a caveat about that report. Please don't look at Kentucky's specific information in our report. The information was compromised with COVID, and so some of the rankings and things were inaccurate for Kentucky. And they actually didn't publish this year's report because the data was so compromised due to COVID. So just keep thinking about that. Data does take a little while, right, to get checked and double checked and processed. So, but 6.34, almost, 6% of youth in the US reported a substance use disorder in the past year. That number hasn't raised significantly, I don't think, but overall in Kentucky, I think you'll see some different information. 59.8% of youth with major depression do not receive any mental health treatment. This is on par with adults who about 50% don't receive any kind of mental health treatment. That fluctuates that number between 48 and 53% of adults based on the year. So typically about half of the people who actually have symptoms are just out there living with them. And when we talk about youth living with them, I think that has complications, right, and ramifications. Nationally, only 28% of youth with severe depression receive some consistent treatment. Most don't receive any kind of care, and that number is significantly higher, 57.3%. Nationally, 1 in 10 youth who are covered under private insurance do not have coverage for their health care. Now, in Kentucky, we have expanded Medicaid, so we have a little bit more health care than everybody else, but still, that is a problem. Private insurers are not required to cover substance use and mental health. If they do, they have to do so on parity with other things. And we find that youth a lot of times just don't have access to that care at all, rather than providing parity, which parity means equal for physical. So if you have unlimited cardiac rehab, you should have unlimited substance use rehab. Those things should be the same in a policy. And that can get expensive from a high level corporate perspective, but obviously our youth are worth it, right? So we need to make sure our benefits and our employers are asking for that. Only 0.718% of students are identified with, so this statistic, I'm just going to stop reading it directly. The IEP issue is one that MHA has been raising for many, many, many years. A lot of people with substance use or emotional disturbance issues, which is what we call most children's mental health problems, are not getting IEPs. And we do have a significant rate in Kentucky, but it's still too small. We know that there are more kids experiencing problems than there are IEPs. They're not getting the educational assistance that they need. So a couple things about equity in those statistics. Asian youth with major depression are the least likely to receive specialty mental health care. 78% report they did not receive mental health services in the past year. That was 2022. Black youth are dying by suicide at younger ages than pre-pandemic and at a higher rate. Black males in rural areas have a higher rate of suicide than their urban peers. The Trevor Project survey found that 41% of LGBTQ young people seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including roughly half of transgender and non-binary youth. And this is not because the transgender is causing that, it's because the society is not accepting and families are not accepting. And I always want to be clear about that statistic. They are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than their peers, again, because of that societal stigma and intolerance. So BIPOC and LGBTQ youth taking MHA screenings report the severest responses to depression and anxiety. So they consistently schedule them or test higher and more severe than their peers. So during COVID, we all know COVID made a big difference, right? I should mention that actually we had a crisis before COVID in youth mental health. I want to make sure that's clear. By 2017, we were seeing an increase in suicides, an increase in emergency room visits, and an increase in those statistics for depression and anxiety and severe emotional disturbance. So we knew that these things were happening, and then we had a pandemic, right? And then we disrupted everybody. So let me see. I'm sorry, I can't read in my own slide right now. I have to move my bar. There we go. 37% of youth reported poor mental health during COVID. 44% said they felt sad or hopeless. 29, an adult lost in their home lost a job, right? These things happened to us during COVID, right? Things happened, a lot of loss, a lot of grief happened on top of things. So if you were already depressed and you experience, job loss in the family, extreme economic disturbance, you can imagine what that would do to youth. So we asked youth at the national level, Mental Health America, ages 11 to 17, when they were taking a screening, we started asking them during COVID, why? What's going on? What are some things? Why are you coming to us? Why did you find us on the internet? Because most people come into our screenings through a Google search. They might say, I am sad. How can I find help? Or I'm feeling scary, or things are scary, or, things like that. Very, very generic kind of kid-related terms end up finding our screenings. And some of the things the kids said are here. I feel so disconnected and confused and alone. Feeling like no one else is feeling what I'm feeling, or no one else is like me, right? I don't know how to get help. They're lost and they're confused. They need some help. I know what's happening to me, but I need help. I'm not okay. These are kind of the things that we're saying, we're seeing from them. I know people who I fear risk suicide, but I don't know how to help them. So I don't know how to help my friends, right? They never had enough help to know how to get help, right? Like they never started this process, is what we figured out that happened. So really what that tells us is youth are not only having more mental health symptoms, they're also really wanting information and not really finding it. Thankfully, those youth found us, and Mental Health America is one of the trusted resources nationally. National Alliance on Mental Illness, SAMHSA, all those folks are very reliable sources of information, and they are being prioritized, thankfully, in a lot of the search engines. But that's information that we need to have, right? And we need to start giving our youth. I really liked this quote from our youth mental health report in 2023 at MHA National. Mental health is public health, right? A public health crisis requires a public health response. And that's what we're seeing in these things. These are not individual things. These are not specific cultures. This is happening across youth, not only in the United States, but also in a lot of nations internationally. So we know youth are having more trouble, but why? Right? So the Surgeon General came out in December of 2021. General Vivek Murthy says the challenges today's generation of people face are unprecedented and uniquely hard to navigate. And the effect these challenges have had on their mental health is devastating. And he's right. Kids today live in a very different environment than they did when I, a millennial, was online, right? The online space has changed as I grew. I can't imagine having every moment of my life on Facebook. And I'm pretty sure a lot of the people on the phone call can't either, right? So we need to think about that. Our youth are facing different worlds, different technologies, rapidly evolving technology all the time, right? There are a lot of things going on that they have that we haven't had to deal with on top of a pandemic, on top of political unrest to a point, right? Divisionist languages, things like that are all playing into the concerns. So some factors that can shape the mental health of young people, things that we know for sure are a part of mental health. Social and economic inequalities, right? Being poor automatically puts you into probably a lesser space for mental health reasons. And it doesn't mean that you have a mental illness because you're poor. Let me be clear about that. But economic stress brings down your mental wellness, right? It's more stress. So even if you don't have a mental illness, it adds stress to your situation. It's an ACE score, right? Racism, migration, media, technology, all of those things are a societal big picture, right? The environment we live in, is it a safe environment? During COVID, we saw some exacerbations of domestic violence, right? We saw political unrest cause some riots and things like that. Marches made people feel uncomfortable, right? And is your neighborhood actually safe, right? Was it safe to take a walk in your neighborhood, or were you stuck in your room because it wasn't safe to leave it? We have to think about those things with youth. Some of those youth faced a very different environment than I would have considered. Do they have access to healthy food? Schools a lot of times are a primary food source for our kids. We have to think about that. And when you're looking for food, it's really hard to think about anything else, right? And to process your big emotions. Relationships with peers are very important. We saw that increased isolation was happening. We saw faith communities disrupted, right? So we knew those things were happening, and they were happening for a good public health reason, but then they caused another little public health problem. So just some things to think about. I really love this graphic, and I'll make sure you all get a copy of it because there's a lot of cool stuff in it. Another thing to remember, the social determinants of mental health is kind of in that graphic, but I like the way this one portrays it, really. We have underemployment, we have food insecurity, we have housing instability. All of these things are happening in Kentucky, but they're also happening in a lot of neighborhoods. There is a lot more economic disparity than there was 10 to 20 years ago. The housing crisis is a real thing, and that is affecting our youth. They are not, comfortable where they're at. They're staying in places where they're not as safe. So we're seeing that nationally. And of course, the digital world effect, right? Just to bring in a couple of Kentucky points, 91.6% of Kentucky households have a computer. 85.6 have a subscription to broadband internet on a regular basis. Social media can have positive and negative effects. If you all get the slides, you can go in deeper on that issue if you would like. But there are positives, right, where they connect people over like things that, maybe that weird kid can find their people online, right, where they can't find it otherwise. But there is other concern like bullying. Cyberbullying, victims between the ages of 10 to 13 are 4 times more likely to report thinking about suicide than those who were not cyberbullied. And I bring up the advances in AI imagery, more lax or unclear rules on social media sites, unclear state laws, cell phones being everywhere, right? Devices that connect to the internet are everywhere. Our youth see what's happening online. And when we do things like what happened with Taylor Swift this weekend, I don't know if folks have saw that. There were AI photos that were created that were distributed wrongly. That's just a national level version of what cyberbullying can look like now. Kids can be, photoshopped into any kind of photo, right? And that's shared amongst friends, and that cyberbullying can happen just cell phone to cell phone. And they're seeing this happen on a national stage sometimes. They hear about it, even if they're not the direct victim. It still affects mental wellness, right? It can cause some paranoia, it can cause anxiety, even if they're not the victim. And one thing that folks don't think about very often, climate change is a part of our mental health problem with our youth, especially. We have had a lot of bad weather events here in Kentucky, for instance. Climate change is part of that. We're going to have more bad weather. We're going to have more fires. We're going to have more tornadoes. We're going to have more flooding. And we know that that's coming. And that uncertainty and that certainty that it will happen is really affecting our young people a lot. And the Lancet really showed that half of 16 to 25-year-olds said climate change makes them feel afraid, sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless, and or guilty. I can't. That one just bothers me a lot. So 45% said these concerns affect their day-to-day living. I will mention, since Kentucky is largely rural, we have a lot of farmers. We have a lot of people who live off the land. And climate change directly affects their ability to do their job and to make their living as well. So, and our youth care about those things. They get involved. We think of teenagers as people who are capable of working, and they are. And a lot of the farm kids are working early in their life, right? So they are aware in a way that a lot of people aren't. Some other reasons for the increases: racism, homophobia, disruptions in family and education, right? And loneliness. The number one reason people list for taking our screenings here in Kentucky is they're feeling lonely. And I think that is a concern that we need to think about, including more youth relationship building. We do have a provider supply problem as well. That 50% that can't get care, some of them really just don't have anyone to see. We are working our best with telehealth and other things, and growing the what they called allied health, so the nurse practitioners and the helpers in these spaces, but we're not keeping up with the need. And I am sorry, I'm probably over time. My apologies. I'll go quicker. 2 things can be simultaneously true. We can do good things. There's some things to keep in mind with solutions. I'll let you all read those on your own. Mostly, I love this strengths-based asset-driven approach, and including our youth in the solutions as we look for those. He did have a summary of some things we need to do, recognizing that mental health is important. Mental health is what? Health, right? Empower the youth and their families to recognize and manage their emotions. So social emotional learning, not just for youth, but also for adults. So many of us miss that. Honestly, as my son is learning, I'm learning, right? And I've been in this space for a while. Ensure everyone has access to care. And we want to make sure that economic and social barriers are being addressed as well. So here are some crisis lines and assistance, things that we offer. Our youth mental health toolkits may be very helpful for folks who are dealing with specific issues, things like grief, social media use from an adult and youth perspective, comparison, self-comparison is such a big issue with our youth and their self-esteem. Our screenings are at mhascreening.org. We have a program called Youth Mental Health First Aid that is for adults who are working with youth in any way. So whether you're a parent, a coach, a cafeteria worker, whatever your role, Youth Mental Health First Aid can help you understand how to help youth and how to identify when a youth is really in trouble, and hopefully intervene earlier. Teen Mental Health First Aid is teen to teen. We don't offer it yet, but I'm happy to help folks explore that if they want to. We do have youth peer specialists. There are just a few of them. Most of them are at kypartnership.org. There are a couple also at MHA Northern Kentucky, Southwest Ohio. And Question, Persuade, Refer is specific suicide prevention, and it can be tailored to youth. And I'm happy to do that if folks want. There are a couple of things we have going on that I'll make sure are in the slides, but just a reminder, everyone deserves recovery and our youth are worth it. Sorry, I went so fast, y'all.
You are fine. And Marcy, thank you for that information. And Marcy did tell us earlier that she is able to provide the slides for us. So we will send her slides in a follow-up email. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lisa and to Meredith. And then at the end of their presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A if you guys have questions for Marcy as well as Lisa and Meredith. So I'll turn it over to Lisa.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Marcy, thank you so much for so much good information. And Marcy did a great job of sharing some national statistics related to youth mental health. And now Meredith and I are going to share some Kentucky specific statistics related to youth mental health. So we can go to the next slide here and just introduce ourselves first. My name is Lisa Crabtree. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm a researcher with Reach Evaluation, and I also direct the Kentucky Incentives for Prevention, the KIP Youth Survey Project. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Cahill, and I'm an epidemiologist at Reach Evaluation. And my primary role with the KIP survey is providing epidemiological support. So a lot of data analysis and interpretation of the results.
So our presentation here today, we were calling it the State of Youth Behavioral Health in Kentucky. So what we're planning to talk about, just wanted to give a quick background so you'll know what to expect. We're going to be talking about, as I mentioned, some Kentucky specific data, and that's coming from the KIP survey. So this session is going to cover the results of the KIP survey that was administered back in 2021. So we're going to be exploring the state of mental health among Kentucky adolescents. And what that looks like is we will be talking about psychological distress, suicidality, self-harm, substance misuse, school safety, and a number of other factors that are associated with behavioral health. And just wanted to go over some objectives, what we're hoping that folks can come away with today. So we're hoping that we can increase awareness of the state of youth mental health in Kentucky. Also want to increase awareness of some of the racial health disparities in youth mental health among Kentucky adolescents, as well as awareness of gender and sexual minority health disparities. And finally, increase awareness of some risk and protective factors, importantly, associated with youth mental health. So the data that we're discussing today, again, come from the KIP Youth Survey. Some folks on this call may be very familiar with the KIP survey, others may have never heard of it. So just wanted to give a little bit of background about where these numbers are coming from. So again, KIP stands for Kentucky Incentives for Prevention. This is a youth survey that's administered to students in middle and high school, so grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. It's Kentucky's largest source of data on adolescent behavioral health and social and emotional well-being. The survey is administered in partnership with the Division of Behavioral Health, Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Important to note that district level participation is voluntary. So districts opt in to administering the survey. In 2021, the year that we're looking at the data, there were 127 school districts out of 173 school districts in Kentucky that participated. And that was right in the middle of COVID. So that was a pretty great participation rate, all things considered, in a difficult and stressful year for educators. And the reason why the KIP survey is given, how do we use the results? The results are used to do exactly what we're doing now here today on this call. They're used to educate. They're used for planning and prevention activities. Districts use the results of their KIP survey to apply for grants, to report on grants currently in place, any and all efforts related to recognizing and meeting the needs of their specific student population. So we can look at the data on a school level, a district level, a regional level, and a statewide level. Why is it important? It is so important. KIP survey data allow school leaders, Friskies, community coalitions, researchers, policymakers, youth serving agencies, wonderful folks like Marcy Timmerman and her group to develop scientific understandings of the experiences and needs of Kentucky students. We need these numbers in order to be able to understand what is actually going on in the classroom with our kids. The data can then be utilized to transform school climates. The information is used to guide the development of programs that are intended to support adolescent health and well-being. So any curricula that might be implemented, those are identified based on data. So real needs are being identified. And then this data is directly connected to obtaining funding. So in order to be able to apply for grants, to get the funding needed to support our kiddos, to support students in the classroom, to make sure that programs currently in place continue and are sustained, that is why we need to collect adolescent behavioral health data. So we're going to start by going over some of the KIPP Youth Survey results. The KIPP survey addresses, as I mentioned, lots of different facets of adolescent behavioral health. Of course, today we're focusing on mental health, but if you're interested in exploring the results further, there's a lot more data than anyone could ever know what to do with, but there's a lot there. And today we are focusing on just a very small slice of the pie. So we are going to start by looking at some demographic data, so we know what we're working with here. So the survey does collect a number of demographics on race and ethnicity, for example. So that's the pie chart that we're seeing here. The largest group of participants in 2021 identified as non-Hispanic white, and nearly 74% of respondents. And this is for all grades combined. So again, 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade students combined are represented in this pie graph here. 6.2% of respondents were non-Hispanic multiracial, 6.5% were non-Hispanic Black respondents. In 2021, the gender question was expanded beyond the binary. So the item was phrased, are you female, male, questioning or unsure, identity not listed here, or prefer not to say. So 49% of students identified as male, 45% identified as female, 2% were questioning or unsure, 2% stated that their identity was not listed as a response option, and 2% preferred not to say. And then we also addressed sexual orientation on the survey. Again, these results are for all grades combined. So 73% of student respondents in 2021 identified as straight or heterosexual. 8% of students preferred not to say. 8% of students said that their identity was not listed. 6% identified as gay or lesbian, and 5% were questioning or unsure. And I'm going to pass it over to Meredith to start going over some of the specific mental health data.
Thanks, Lisa. Yes, so I'm going to dive right in. Like Lisa mentioned, the survey covers a lot of different behavioral health issues. It has a lot of different mental health questions, and we're going to be focusing on some of the key indicators we look at when we're trying to get a general sense of what is going on in going on among Kentucky adolescents when it comes to their mental health. And the first metric that we usually look at is a measure of serious psychological distress. And so the KIPP survey asked students a series of 6 questions. It's called the K6 scale, and it asks them non-specific questions related to depression and anxiety. And students who score a 13 or higher on this scale are considered to have experienced serious psychological distress in the past 30 days. So what we see on this slide is the trends in the rates of serious psychological distress by grade level between the 2012 KIPP administration and the 2021 KIPP administration. And there are a few things I want to make sure to point out, and that is that we are seeing among all grade levels an increase in serious psychological distress between 2012 and 2021. There is not one grade that did not experience significant increases. Among all grade levels, our 6th graders are experiencing the most significant increase. So you can see in 2012, we had rates of serious psychological distress among our youngest kiddos at just under 10%. And now in 2021, we're seeing it at 16.2%. Other important grade level variations that we're seeing is that our high schoolers are reporting the highest rates of serious psychological distress. And this has been consistent between 2012 and 2021, just with really alarming rates in 2021, with 1 in 4 of our high schoolers saying that they are experiencing serious psychological distress. But really important to note that our 8th graders are starting to catch up, with 1 in 5 at 21.2%. And again, our 6th graders with that really significant increase at 16.2%. The KIPP survey also asked students whether they have ever intentionally harmed themselves. And so unlike serious psychological distress, we did not see and have not seen a consistent increase between earlier KIPP administrations. So here on the slide, 2014 to 2021, for all grade levels. But again, our youngest kids, our 6th graders, are reporting, a significant and continued increase since 2014, reaching rates of 13.3% in 2021. And even though we are, not seeing, a significant increase for our 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, the rates remain stable, if not increasing a little bit, and they're really high. Our 10th graders experiencing highest rates at 19.7% in 2021, followed by our 12th graders at 18.6%, and then our 8th graders at 17.4%. The KIPP survey also asked students about suicidality. So one of the questions is whether a student has seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. And so that is what is depicted on this slide. Again, the results from the 2014 KIPP administration through 2021. And similar to serious psychological distress for all grade levels between our baseline year, so for this graph 2014, and then the most recent administration 2021, we see an increase in students reporting suicidal ideation. And again, our 10th graders are reporting the highest rates at about 16%. And again, we see that really concerning increase among our youngest students. So our 6th graders, with that really significant increase, less than 6%, just under in 2014, all the way to almost 10% in 2021. But another important kind of grade variation I want to point out when we're looking at suicidal ideation is that for a lot of these measures, we saw our high schoolers with much higher rates of these mental health outcomes compared to our middle schoolers. And you can see that for suicidal ideation, our middle schoolers or 8th graders are catching up to our high schoolers with similar rates in 2016 and 2018 and just under our 12th graders in 2021. Next, the KIPP survey asks about whether students have attempted suicide in the past year. And for many grade levels, so for our 6th, 12th, and our 8th graders, we see an increase between our baseline year of 2014 and 2021. But what I find most striking, besides just that these numbers are far too high, is that our 8th graders are now, the rates of suicide attempt are above our 12th grade students. And actually in 2021 increased and are now above our 10th grade students, which typically report our highest level of poor mental health outcomes among all grade levels. So you can see that in 2021, our 8th graders were at 8.4%, our 10th graders at 8.1%, and then our 6th and 12th graders right there at 6.7%. So like Marcy mentioned in her presentation, we know there are disparities, mental health disparities based on our different demographic groups. And so it's really important for us to disaggregate our data and break it down to make sure that we are, finding the students that really need our help and really need our resources and attention. So this graph is showcasing our mental health disparities by gender identity. So all of the mental health indicators that we discussed, serious psychological distress, suicidal ideation, suicide attempt, and lifetime deliberate self-harm are all broken down by our gender categories, which Lisa explained at the top of the slide, which were increased to go beyond binary this past administration. And what you see here is that our students who are identifying outside of the gender binary, so those that are questioning or unsure, identity not listed, or prefer not to say, are reporting higher levels of all of these mental health outcomes compared to students who identify inside the gender binary, so our female and male students. And our students who report being an identity not listed are reporting the highest rates across all of these different indicators. We did the same by sexual orientation. So students who reported sexual orientation other than straight or heterosexual or identified as sexual minorities reported higher rates of all of these four mental health outcomes compared to their straight or heterosexual peers. With our gay and lesbian students reporting the highest rates across the board, followed closely by our students who reported an identity not listed, and then our questioning or unsure students. We also want to look at our mental health indicators by race and ethnicity. And so this graph here is looking at serious psychological distress by both grade and race and ethnicity. And so there's a lot of data here, but what I want to point out first is that you'll notice the purple bar, which is showing the non-Hispanic, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander group has an asterisk. You'll see this on this slide and the following slide, and that's just because this group of students is really small in Kentucky. And so when we break it down by grade, race, and ethnicity, the number of students in each category becomes small, and so the rates are statistically unstable. And so it's just something to keep a note when you're looking at that and when you're interpreting the data. But when I have graphs like this, I like to kind of look at trends like the top three. What groups are kind of consistently, having higher, having the top three highest rates, among all the other groups. And so you can see here in sixth grade that our non-Hispanic multiracial students, our non-Hispanic American Indian and Alaskan Native, and our non-Hispanic other race students are reporting rates of serious psychological distress higher than their peers. And the actual rate of serious psychological distress for sixth grade was around like 15%. So you can see that when broken out by race and ethnicity, we do have several of our student groups that are experiencing rates much higher than that. Moving on to eighth grade, again, we see our non-Hispanic other race and non-Hispanic multiracial students with higher rates of serious psychological distress compared to other groups. But here we see our Hispanic students actually reporting the third highest rate among all racial and ethnic groups. In 10th grade, similar trend here. Again, top three are Hispanic, non-Hispanic other race, and non-Hispanic multiracial students. And then 12th grade, a very similar trend. So across the board, our non-Hispanic multiracial and non-Hispanic other race students are consistently reporting some of the highest rates of serious psychological distress compared to all other racial and ethnic groups. We also looked at suicidal ideation with the same breakdown, so by grade and race and ethnicity. We see some similar trends here, but something that is particular to this indicator for sixth grade is that our non-Hispanic Black students are starting to report rates of suicidal ideation above our Hispanic and our non-Hispanic other race group, which had for serious psychological distress primarily had higher rates than the other racial and ethnic categories. But again, and I hate to speed through this because I really want to dig in, but I know we're limited on time. Just pointing out, we are seeing disparities, and our non-Hispanic other race and non-Hispanic multiracial students are really, experiencing increased rates of suicidal ideation compared to their peers. So we all know that mental health doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's very tied to substance use as well. And so this slide is just showing the connection that we found in the Kentucky data. So what you see here is on the x-axis number of substances reported in the past 30 days by students. And then on the y-axis, you're seeing the percentage of students who attempted suicide in the past year. So very clear, there's a very direct relationship. What we find is that among 10th graders, the number of students, as the number of substances reported increases in the past 30 days, so does the percentage of students who attempted suicide, just showing that really strong connection between the two. Marcy also in her presentation mentioned the really important role that bullying plays in youth mental health and how that really coincides with mental health outcomes. And so this slide here is looking at bullying in the past year among our 10th graders, broken out by sexual orientation. And so we have bullied on school property, cyberbullied, and then both. So students who are reporting both being bullied on school property and cyberbullied. So first, I just want to take a moment to say these rates are much too high for all groups, but then when we really break it out by sexual orientation, we can see that again, our students who are, identifying as sexual minorities or do not identify as straight or heterosexual are reporting much higher rates of all types of bullying across the board. School safety is another very important, not even just indicator, but something that's very important in the mental health of youth. They spend so much time at school, and so the way they feel in their environment can have such a strong impact on their mental health. So here we are looking at the percentage of 10th graders who feel unsafe or very unsafe at school by gender, broken out again by those categories that Lisa mentioned at the beginning of the slide deck. And so what we see here is that our students who are identifying outside of the gender binary are reporting rates much higher, or rates of feeling unsafe or very unsafe at school much higher than their cisgender peers, with 1 in 3 students who reported identity not listed or prefer not to say, feeling unsafe or very unsafe, and then about 30% of our questioning and unsure students. I have talked a lot, so I am going to pass it back to Lisa. Lisa, I think you're muted.
Thanks. And I'm going to address some risk and protective factors. And what that means is things that are in place that can put a young person at either increase or decrease their risk for experiencing some of these mental health issues. And it's so important to talk about these things because these are the pieces that are actionable. So we've just gone over all this information about the state of affairs, about what we're seeing with kiddos. And that feels very heavy. It feels very scary. It feels very like, what now? What can we do? So it's so important to think about these risk and protective factors because they are actionable. And again, this is what we're seeing with our actual students in Kentucky. And we know that district to district, we can look at these data and say, hey, this particular group of kiddos is showing that they need this, or they're at, demonstrating that they are not getting enough sleep. So that's where our school leaders, our community groups are able to actually go in and work at making a difference. So let's talk about some ways that we can get in and do something about what we're seeing here. So first, we're going to talk about sleep. We know that there's absolutely an established connection between sleep and not just mental health, but all aspects of behavioral health. So students, young people, and adults who are not getting the sleep that they need are at increased risk for adverse health outcomes. So the way we've broken down this graph, it can feel like a lot to look at, but this is a really cool graph. So we're showing the question on the KIPP survey asks, on an average night, how many hours of sleep do you get? So at the bottom, we show the American Academy of Sleep. We're showing their recommendations by age. So our 6th graders are recommended to get between 9 and 12 hours a night. 8th graders are recommended to get between 8 and 10 hours a night, and that's the same for 10th and 12th grade. So at the top there, that percentage with the bracket is showing the percentage of students at each grade level that is getting the recommended amount of sleep nightly. So 26% of our 8th graders were getting 9 or more hours of sleep a night. Then you can see the pattern drops as we go, as the grade levels get a little higher. So our 8th graders, only 37% of our 8th graders are getting the recommended amount of sleep per night. Our 10th graders, 25%, and our 12th graders, 19%. That's something we can do something about. Families can work on, schools can work on, there can be messaging around that. We can be looking at sleep and its connections to health. So to drive the point home a little further, this graph breaks down sleep and suicidality. So we know, again, that students getting less sleep are at higher risk of both suicidal ideation and attempt. So you can see here that risk decreases as the number of hours increases. So students who are getting 10 or more hours of sleep, 8 or 9 hours of sleep, are at much lower risk for experiencing suicidal ideation or attempt. We also ask on the survey about students' connection to a trusted adult. So the question asks, do you know an adult in or out of school with whom you could talk to and go to for help? Having a connection to a trusted adult is an established protective factor against all sorts of behavioral health issues. This pie graph shows results for all grades combined, so students in grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. And we can see here that nearly 13% of students responded that no, they do not have a connection to a trusted adult. And again, I want to show the connection here to suicidality. So this is trusted adult and suicidality among youth with and without a trusted adult. And students or 10th graders without a trusted adult were at much higher risk for suicidal ideation, planning, and attempt. So that's the blue bar. Those are our students without a trusted adult. Similar pattern for gender identity and trusted adults. So this graph shows the percentage of 10th grade students without a trusted adult, and it's broken down by those gender categories. So students who preferred not to say, were questioning, or whose identity wasn't listed as a response option, those students were much less likely to have a connection to a trusted adult. This graph shows sexual orientation and trusted adult. So what we're seeing here is the percentage of 10th graders without a trusted adult broken down by those sexual orientation categories that we discussed in the demographic slide in the beginning. And what we're seeing is that gay or lesbian students are students who were questioning or preferred not to say, and students whose identity was not listed here are, again, much less likely to have a connection to a trusted adult than their straight or heterosexual peers. Social media use and suicidality. The 2021 version of the KIPP survey for the first time addressed social media use. That question was added in 2021. Again, emerging research has established a connection between social media use and mental health. Marcy spoke to there's some positive aspects to it, and of course there's some negative aspects to it as well. What we're seeing here for the negative aspects is that rate of use, so frequency of use, is correlated to suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. So this graph shows that students who were checking their social media at a greater frequency, so every couple of minutes, were at much higher risk for suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. So that is a summary. It's a quick overview. There's a lot more there, but we wanted to sort of hit the high points. And of course, we talked about the importance of this survey. Those data were from 2021. Wanted to share that the next time these data will be collected is in the next school year. So fall of the 24-25 school year. We hope that lots of districts will participate. In March next month, all district superintendents will receive an official invitation letter from the state commissioner. And we hope that they will take that letter, understand the importance of participating, and sign their district on. The 2024 KIPP survey will also include a few additional items. So we're going to be looking at disordered eating, school connectedness as another protective factor, and also disability status. Wanted to go over really quickly just a few additional youth mental health sources of data. So I'm going to let Meredith talk about one that's related to this group.
Yes. So the first additional resource is what we call the Kentucky Youth Mental Health or the indicators of social and emotional health and well-being of Kentucky youth 2012 to, wow, I am getting ahead of myself. So I'm gonna pause and I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm gonna start again. Okay, so the additional resource is the Indicators of Social and Emotional Health and Wellbeing of Kentucky Youth Dashboard. And so this was created in response to recommendations from the State Interagency Council. So their Social and Emotional Health Task Force. And they recommended the identification of 3 to 5 different indicators of social and emotional health and well-being for youth and young adults across the state. It's a way to really kind of do a quick snapshot to monitor the well-being of our Kentucky youth, as well as to guide a lot of their quality improvement activities. And so after, a series of meetings working together with the great people, on the SEAC and then REACH, we came to kind of a conclusion. And so the featured indicators on this kind of snapshot dashboard is youth experience of past 30-day psychological distress, mental, emotional development or behavioral problems requiring treatment or counseling, suicidal ideation among our 6th graders, substance use in the past 30 days, and then kind of a zoom in look at some of the different substances that the KIPP survey addresses. So vaping, alcohol use, cigarette use, and cannabis use. And so this is what the dashboard looks like. This is page 1. We added a couple more protective risk and protective factors on a second page. So if you access the website from the slides, you'll be able to see that. But this is page 1. All of the indicators are on the left. It shows baseline data and then the latest KIPP administration data and provides some graphics to show whether we've seen, a positive change, so a green check mark, or a negative change with that red X there. And then what I'm really excited about is we did a lot of great work this year, and we were able to provide breakdowns by different demographic groups. So for most of these indicators, or the indicators that come from the KIPP survey, you'll see a breakdown by race and ethnicity. And then if you click here on these boxes, you can also see a breakdown by gender identity and sexual orientation. So I really encourage you all to check it out. It's a great, resource to have, even to just like print off and share with folks. It's a great snapshot of what's going on currently in the state.
Similarly, we also created this great infographic that is another snapshot. This is the state of youth mental health in Kentucky. So pulls a handful of indicators from the KIPP survey, does some breakdowns of race-based concerns in mental health, shows some trend data, shows some disparities related to our sexual and gender minority students, connects serious psychological distress and substance use. It also just looks a little less scary, a little less overwhelming. This version of this infographic we really created to be used and distributed to a very wide audience, an audience that could immediately pick it up and understand and absorb what's going on in our state related to youth mental health, even if they're not used to looking at like line graphs and bar graphs all day long. So this is really easy to read and interpret. It's an awesome resource to be able to share with community partners. It includes a call to action section at the end, most of which those recommendations are pulled, Marcy, directly from the Surgeon General's awesome report. So really pulling from that as well. This is a great resource. It's available on the KIPP survey website. You can distribute it electronically. It's wonderful. We've created a series of infographics. So this is just one of the infographics related to youth mental health. We've done another broken down by racial disparities, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and impacts of COVID as well. So feel free to explore those. And I mentioned that the infographics were available on our KIPP survey website. If you're interested in looking at the full set of KIPP data resources, everything is available on our website. So again, that was just a quick overview that we did today. We have some interactive tools. If you're a data person, you can go in there and use our data dashboard or data visualizer that allows you to break things down at a regional level, look at trend data. There's also lots of links to other data resources, information about the background of the KIPP survey if you're really interested in diving in, but KIPP survey website is a great resource for lots of different information.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we had some more slides that we had really hoped to be able to add in today, but just given the time limit, we couldn't. And so these slides are also available to send out afterward, and so there'll be some supplementary ones after this question slide that provide, you know, a little more maybe of a breakdown by our different demographic categories or some different substance misuse indicators. So just wanted to make sure that I said that before our time came to a close. And that's all we really, you know, have for you all in terms of a kind of a basic Kentucky overview. I think we're saving questions for the end. But yeah, thank you all.
Right. Lots of wonderful, well, lots of heavy information shared today. Let me say that, but lots of great information, especially in my world of REAC. If you are looking to see what to incorporate into your strategic plan, lots of data here that can be utilized for that information. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions and answers. So if you have any questions based on the material that Marcy provided or that Lisa or Meredith did, please feel free to come off mute and ask, or you can put your questions in the chat box and Lee and I can kind of monitor that as well.